So, let's look at number 3. Okay, for number 3, you have a squared plus 14a minus 51 equals 0. For this problem, if you can factor it, factoring is going to be the quickest way to solve it. And I think 51 is 17 times 3, is it? Yes. 51 is 17 times 3. So, in this case, this one will factor. Now, just because it will factor doesn't mean you have to factor. You can use quadratic formula, you can use completing the square on any problem. But if it will factor, it is going to be the quickest to factor. Yes. Why not? Yeah. So I know. Sometimes the other problem with factoring is sometimes you just like don't see the right combination. All right. You can factor positive 17, negative 3. Remember, those are not the answers. That's just this factoring. You got to set each one equal to 0 here, which you probably skipped doing that step. So you should get negative 17 and 3 as your answers there. Okay, so if you've got one that will factor, just factor it. Even though it says use completing the square, just factor it. That's fine. Several of these will factor, but you are going to have some that will not factor. So, let's see. It will. Negative 11, negative 1. Let's see. 9. Yeah, I don't think 9's going to factor. Or if 9 factors, it's not going to factor like super easily if it does. We'll see there. So I need to be looking at the key. That'll tell me whether they factor or not. So if I've got r squared minus 4r minus 91 equals 7. Okay. For this, I can't solve it like it is. What does it have to be equal to before I can solve it? 0. So I need to subtract the 7. So I've got r squared minus 4r minus 98 equals 0. And, I mean, you could mess with 98 for a while. It might, I mean, there's a chance it might factor. But maybe you just say to yourself, I don't even feel like dealing with the 98, right? So, there are 2 methods that will always work. Okay? Those methods are completing the square and quadratic formula. They work if they factor, they work if they don't factor, they work all the time. They work if you get imaginary solutions, they always work. So, let's remind ourselves about quadratic formula. What is our quadratic formula? Yep. So, opposite of b plus minus square root. B squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Here. So quadratic formula, you need to have it memorized. For your mathematical, the rest of your mathematical career, teachers are going to assume you know how to use the quadratic formula. So make sure that you've got that and that you know it. So we are going to use quadratic formula for this. So we'll get x equals opposite of b, so that's going to be 4, plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac, so negative 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 98 all over 2 times 1. You may use your calculator, but I want exact answers, so I still want the square root in your answer, unless it boils down to a whole number. So I'm going to do this negative 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 8 right here. Let me grab my calculator. Let me give you a strong warning here. This calculator will lie to you if you do not tell it exactly what you mean. I just never put this negative here, because what's going to happen to that negative when you square it? It's going to be positive. But if you type it in like this, negative 4 squared, it's going to tell you it's negative 16 squared. You really didn't mean negative 4 squared. What you meant was negative 4 squared, like that, right? Just don't even type in the negative, because when you square it, it's going to be positive anyway. So 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 98 is going to give us 408. So we got 4 plus or minus square root 408 all over 2. And so square root of 408, I'm certain that is not a perfect square, but you might want to check it just to see. It's not. So you guys were correct. This one will not factor, because if it does factor, you should get a whole number for that square root. So 408, we need to break it down. What could we break it down? I know 4 is going to go into it. Would anything bigger go into it? Let's try 16. No. I don't think there's going to be anything bigger that goes into it. 16 won't go, 64 won't go. It's just 4 and 102. Does 102 break down? Wait, 102 is divisible by 9. No, it's not. It's divisible by 3, but it's not divisible by 9. I don't think it breaks down any further. I think it's just, I think that 408 is 4 times 102. So it's 4 plus or minus 2 root 102 all over 2. And then I'm looking, this last part is actually a little helpful for your quiz today. You won't have a plus or minus, but you might have something that ends up looking like this that you have to simplify. So if you're going to reduce, you got to be able to reduce all 3 of those numbers. Can we reduce all 3 of those numbers? We can. They are all divisible by 2. So this is just going to give us 2 plus or minus 1 times the square root of 102. We don't have to write that 1 there, and we also don't have to write the 1 in the bottom. So we get 2 plus or minus the square root of 102. Let me make sure 102 won't break down. Cool. That seems wrong, but I guess it's fine. Yeah, it doesn't break down. Alright. Okay, I want to try to convince you that completing the square is better for certain problems. I may not convince you. You are eventually going to have to know how to complete the square. Today, you can basically just use quadratic formula on every problem if you want. Okay, so if you don't like completing the square, then that's fine. You don't have to do it. Eventually, when we get to Unit 4, you're going to have to learn how to do it. So, completing the square, I'm going to try to convince you that on problems like this one, completing the square is actually better. I'm going to rework this particular problem with completing the square. I'm going to do it kind of quickly to try to convince you, and then we'll pick another problem to do also. So, r squared minus 4r minus 91 equals 7. So for completing the square, what you want is you want to get one side, you want to make it a perfect square. So so that you can write it as like r plus 2 squared. And then the other side, you just have to fill in as you go. So you want to have r squared minus 4r plus blank equals, and then you're going to move this 91 over here to the other side. So you got a 98, and we're going to put a plus blank over here as well. Because if we add something to one side of the equation, we have to add something to the other side as well. Okay? So what we're looking for is a square double square here, right? So we want something where if we have r something squared here, if we square double square, we'll get this value above. So the way to do this is this number that goes right here is always half of your middle term, right? Because that middle term is your double, right? So half of it goes here. This is negative 2. Okay? So we are dividing by 2 to get this number that goes right here. And then if I multiply this back, if I square double square this, r squared is r squared. R times negative 2 doubled gives us negative 4r. And then negative 2 squared gives us 4. So we're going to add 4 right here. So I am raising this to the second power to get the number that goes here. Okay. So if I add a 4 to that side, I have to also add a 4 over here on this side. Which means I now have r minus 2 squared equals the square root of 102. And now I have an equation that I can solve pretty quickly. So how do I get rid of this square right here? Square root. Oh wait, I'm sorry, I've already drawn the square root in. I shouldn't have put that there. This is just a 102. And so I've got r minus 2 equals square root of 102. When I square root both sides of an equation, what do I have to put? Plus or minus. And then I need to move the 2 over, so I end up with r equals 2 plus or minus square root of 102. I like it so much better because we didn't have to break down the square root of 408 or reduce at the end. So I prefer this method for certain problems. You're taking half, so you drop the and you drop the variable completely. So half of it, and then you square it to get this number that you add here. If you add it to the side, you got to add it to the other also. And that should get it in a form where you can just solve the equation from there. I love completing the square on certain problems. It can get messy if you end up getting fractions, or if you have a coefficient in front of your r squared. So sometimes I still use quadratic formula. But I do like it. So let's try completing the square on another problem where it is useful. Let's do 13. I've got v squared minus 6v equals negative 91. Okay. So we want this to be v squared minus 6v plus something equals negative 91 plus something. Right? Nope. It's going to be 9. Because what we want is we want to have v, and it's going to be a minus 3 squared. It's always half of that middle term. And then to square double square to get that value here, you got to square that 3 to get a 9 right there. And so if I add 9 to one side, I must add it to the other as well. So negative 82. We're okay here? All right. Square root both sides. V minus 3 equals plus or minus. I've got negative 82 here. 82 I'm pretty sure will break down. I think at least 4 will go. No, 4 doesn't go into it. It might not break down. Anybody find anything that goes into it? Let's double check. When you get to calculus next year, I'll give you one of these to take home and use for the year. TI-89. It will simplify radicals for you, so you don't even have to think about it. In fact, it'll even deal with i's some. Yeah, that doesn't break down. So it does not break down, but we can pull an I out because of that negative. And then we just move the 3 over. So we get V equals 3 plus or minus I root 82. That plus or minus sign right there goes with that square root of negative 82. So when you add this 3 to move it over to the other side, you cannot add it to the term that has that I and that square root of 82 because those are not like terms. So they're just separated by that plus or minus. Okay? I like it better because you don't have to break down as much or simplify at the end as much. But there are some problems where I would never try to complete the square, such as number 18. For 18, you've got 9n squared plus 79 equals negative 18n. So if you are completing the square, you have to have you cannot have a coefficient in front of your n squared. So your first step you would have to do for this problem, if you were completing the square, I'm going to write this down, but then we'll go back and just do quadratic formula on this, so you don't necessarily need to write this down. I'm going to lock it in place so I can erase. So the first step you would have to do is you'd have to divide everything by 9, but 79 divided by 9 doesn't work. So you're dealing with like an n squared plus 79 over 9 equals negative 2n. So if you have to complete the square with this, you would have to deal with that fraction in the problem. And a lot of times I'm like, not worth it for me to deal with a fraction. So on problems like this, where I have a coefficient or where I'm going to end up with a fraction, I usually just use quadratic formula. Completing the square will work. You can still complete the square if you just love it. Or if you have forgotten the quadratic formula, completing the square always works, right, if you remember how to do it. But I would probably just use quadratic formula here. For you to use quadratic formula, you've got to move this 18n over to the other side. And then we'll just do, I guess it would be n instead of x. N equals negative 18 plus or minus square root 18 squared minus 4 times 9 times 79 all over 2 times 9. And then 18 squared minus 4 times 9 times 79 is going to give me negative 2,520. All over 18. 2,520. Let's go into that. 4 does, so let's try 2,520. Try 16. No. $36 works. 70 won't break down with it. I think it's going to be 36 and 70. Yeah, so we got negative 36 and 70. So that's going to be 6I root 70. So we're going to get negative 18 plus or minus 6I root 70 all over 18. And then we are looking at these three numbers right here to see if they will reduce. Is there anything I could divide all three of those by? 6. So if I divide everything by 6 there, I'm going to get n equals negative 3 plus or minus I root 70 all over 3. And I think that should be it. Okay, so any method you would like except for photomath. If that's your favorite method for solving quadratics, pick another one. But any handwritten way to solve this, you can use if you can factor, factoring is going to be fastest, but completing the square and quadratic formula for the ones that do not. Let's see, you got... I'll let you skip 4. You can skip 4. 4 problems, yeah. Yeah. So if you, I mean, it can be the last 4 if you just want to do 1 through 20, or if you've got like one you get to and it's hard and you want to skip it, that's fine also. So you can skip 4. So have 20 of those done, and the ones that we did in class count as completed problems. So we've done like 4 of those, so you're really down to 16. Okay? All right, so questions before we take our quiz. Several of you did the practice quiz last night. Anything you ran into?
When this question, I'm multiplying and there's like a negative that's when you pull the eyes.
Yes, yes. Pull the eyes out first before you multiply. So like because it'll make you miss a negative on that. So like if you have 2 root negative 6 times 3 root negative 5, you need to pull the i's out first. 2I root 6, 3I root 5. Then you can multiply together 6I squared root 30. So you get negative 6 root 30. So make sure if you're multiplying 2 things together, you pull the I out first. It only causes problems when you have negatives under both of them, because you're going to end up with an I either way if there's only one, but it will cause you to miss it if you don't do the I's first. It's on Delta Math, yes. Other questions?
You said cube root on the calculator is raised to 1/3.
Yes. So if you need to do a cube root of 27 on the calculator, you're going to do 27 raised to the 1/3 power.
Does it have to be in parentheses like that?
Yes, when you type it in. Well, if you have the newer calculators, maybe not, but if you just do it like this, it will not work. If you have the new calculators where it looks like it's a fraction whenever you type it in, it might be okay, but that is not correct. It should be 27 to the 1/3. That fraction needs to be in parentheses. It should be 3. Okay, other questions? Okay, the quiz is on Delta Math. It should be posted now. I had it